Warren Smith is a sneaky little weasel snake, a sneasel, a wake, a freaking coward, and we're gonna talk about it. This all started when Warren Smith of the Secret Scholar Society YouTube channel went on the Whatever podcast as a panelist.
I have a lot of respect for Destiny. I just got to meet him.
He is incredibly meek in person, which is fine. I don't know how I'd act if I was on a Whatever podcast either. I'd probably need like 2 clonazepams and a couple beer to calm the old nerves. I got that anxiety, you know? But what's frustrating is he goes on as meek as can be, engages in a pleasant discussion with Brian, and then goes home and makes a video like this. Brother, what are you doing? But did Warren dismantle Brian of the Whatever podcast, final boss of the manosphere, allegedly, with facts and or logic? We're gonna find out. We're gonna be going through Warren's video. I'm gonna be showing you the context from the original Whatever podcast he was on, and you can decide for yourself, dear viewers, if he dismantled Brian and if he fairly represented him. This original video is like 7 hours long, and I wanted to get the context, so I watched it again because I'd already watched it once and thought they had a decent discussion, so I was surprised when I saw Warren make a video like this. So please like and subscribe, because every time this shit happens, I have to watch the Whatever podcast twice, which means it's like 14 hours of watching, which is just too much. Okay, so just hit that button. It'll take 2 seconds. Before we even start, Warren's video is almost entirely devoid of substance and context. And look, you might like Warren Smith, okay? And I have no issues with the guy personally, but that's kind of an issue that crops up with a lot of his videos. He's got an interesting backstory of being fired from being a high school teacher for pretty dumb reasons, and he makes short conservative coded videos. But from what I've seen, they never go into any real depth or nuance and just kind of give a vanilla critique of whatever he's talking about with some easy layups thrown in, and that's fine. His videos are short, so it's meant to be just a quick overview. They're only about 10 minutes long, and he's usually reacting to something seemingly on the fly. But when he's leaving out important context and fighting straw men, it becomes less fine.
When I was brought onto the Whatever podcast, my role was supposed to be the guy who destroys all the women on the panel.
This is already off to a weird start and reiterates what he said in the title. Why did you assume the goal was to go on the podcast and destroy the other women? If you want to destroy women, that's your prerogative. But Destiny, whom you respect,
I have a lot of respect for Destiny.
went on to Whatever podcast and fought with Brian and fought with the other panelists and fought with basically everybody and just, said his opinion on what he thought at any given moment, which sometimes was in line with Brian, sometimes was in line with the panelists, and sometimes was just his own thoughts. Unless you have DMs between you and Brian telling you that you're invited on to be the side to be crushing OF girls or something, then you setting up that as an expectation is entirely in your own mind. Now, at the same time, I don't want to be naive here. I get that usually male guests that are invited on to the Whatever podcast are your typical alpha male conservative bros types. The debates themselves are a separate thing, and a lot of men are on there are extremely opposed to Brian, and that's kind of the setup. But I understand that on a panel show, by you being the guy, I get that there could be an implicit expectation that you're going to side with Brian, but nowhere is that stated, and you can break those stereotypes. So again, unless Brian explicitly told you that you two were going to like tag team for the patriarchy and crush the female panelists, that's you playing into those stereotypes. Again, Destiny went on and he had no problem going against those stereotypes, so that's a you issue. So don't make a freaking video titled, "They invited me on to debate women." I get the need for clickbait, okay? But you're also a big channel, so you can do a bit better. But you also double down on the title in your actual video, which at that point is just inexcusable. So you still seem to think that that was what was going on when you were invited onto the show?
I consider myself like a male advocate. Some people call this like men's rights advocacy. So I put that beyond like conservative positions, because conservatives and feminists are actually similar in a lot of ways. But
When Brian said conservatives were basically feminists, I couldn't resist.
What do you mean?
in how conservatives and feminists are similar?
This panel seemed pretty normal, so there wasn't that much really there. The girl sitting next to me, she works for the show, and her job is to just sit there and eat popsicles. I thought, what the hell, let's do it.
I'm intrigued in the difference between conservative, or the comparison of conservatives and feminists.
And how they're similar?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the best way, they're obviously not the same, but there are a lot of similarities. I mean, maybe you've heard of the, what's it called? The horseshoe? What's that called? Horseshoe theory, where like the political spectrum, like as I could be misstating this, as you get to some of the extremes of like the left or the right, they tend to have like a lot of similarities actually. But I think like there's a component of feminist movement that looks towards men's agency to like, but there's a blame that goes on, like it's men's fault, men need to fix it, whereas conservatives will say, won't put a blame on men, but they'll still say like agency falls on men, men need to be the ones like fixing problems and like being responsible in like leadership positions in like wartime. And
Apparently, if you think that men should step up in crises, in times of war, that makes you a feminist.
Even in the clip you just showed, this isn't what Brian said. Brian is presenting horseshoe theory that sometimes extreme views on seemingly polar opposite sides of an ideology start to sound similar. Common examples are how the far right and the far left can end up both loving Russia, hating corporations, and thinking that people with funny hats are controlling everything. Brian is applying this to men being the problem. The Daily Wire types will say that men need to step up and be better, and in that way, the blame is placed on them. And a lot of feminists think that men are the problem and place blame on them too. Personally, I think everyone's to blame. I'm an equal opportunity blamer. I think women suck in some ways when seen on a collective level, and I think men suck in some ways when also seen on a collective level. I am equal parts misandrist and misogynistic. A true misanthrope, but in a semi-ironic way. But this isn't about me, okay? This is about Brian, and this is about you, Warren. And I don't see how you can take Brian's point and conclude that.
Apparently, if you think that men should step up in crises, in times of war, that makes you a feminist.
But then you just jump into another video, so maybe the clip you're about to show justifies what you just said.
I reject the disposability of males. So I think, I'm against it. That's the only way I can answer your question. I don't think men should like die for strangers, basically.
And on the surface, that sounds good, because who would? I don't want women to die for strangers. I don't want men to die. I don't want anyone to die for strangers, but that's not contending with the point that's being made. It's just kind of reciting these talking points.
And I reject the disposability of males. So it's just, I think it's a pretty coherent worldview.
I agree with you. Males should not be disposable.
Not wanting men to die is not a worldview. Treating that like a worldview is what we see from the far left when they say, well, I'm against poverty. That's my worldview.
Okay, instead of justifying that statement, you show a random out of context clip, so I guess I'll show what led up to that discussion because you didn't. It was a discussion about the Titanic and if men should be morally required to give up their seat for women.
Someone brought up the Titanic example, and that's one that comes up a lot on here.
I think that was Lucas, yeah.
I know some guys, they're like, well, and I want to ask them, the ones that don't think it's fair, what would you have gotten in the lifeboat? And many of them would probably be like, yeah, why not? And then I want to ask, well, what if your kids were on shore and they were going to hear the story later, and then there was going to be a movie made and you're being depicted in the movie, now you live on. It's like, would you die for that? Well,
what's your answer to that? Would you get on the lifeboat, try to get on the lifeboat?
No.
Or would you stay with the sinking
No, but
ship?
everyone's probably going to say that, but no, I think because it's as unfair as it is, it's the same reason you'd be storming a beach or whatnot, or drafted.
Well, this is where I diverge a bit from you, Warren. I mean, so my own personal decision, if I was on the Titanic, and this is of course assuming like I have an option to choose to go on it, like there's not like other men who are basically like, nope, stay back. Even then I'm like, I'm fucking fighting to get on that shit. I don't care.
So the guy in the movie, you would do that?
Was there? It's been a minute since I've seen Titanic.
He grabs the kid so he can get on the lifeboat and save himself.
If there's no repercussions, I will. If there's the most innocent baby, I'm gonna punt the baby and take the seat. No, I mean I'm about self-preservation. Obviously, there's limits. Like there's certain things I suppose I wouldn't do to. Like, if it comes at like, well, it's kind of like that question. Would you annihilate everybody else to save your family, your wife, and your children? That's I probably would. Actually, wait, hold on. Let me think about that. That might sound really bad.
I was just going to say, so you would kill the entire human race.
Yeah. So, okay, the question is, would I get on the life preserver on the Titanic?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
But it's like an honorability thing. Like, would you want to be the guy who jumped on the lifeboat while someone else died? Like, you would have to be that for the rest of your life.
Yeah,
the guys in the Titanic movie, like
I
the
can
ones
deal with
that are
guilt.
the ones
I can do. You know what's better than guilt? Still being alive.
So when you say this line,
who would? I don't want women to die for strangers. I don't want men to die. I don't want anyone to die for strangers, but that's not contending with the point that's being made. It's just kind of reciting these talking points.
It sounds like you're saying that. You're saying it's the right thing to do for people based on the fact that they're men to die for women who are strangers to them. So you can act like Brian is just saying a talking point, but you disagree with what he's saying. And that's fine, by the way. I'm not sure where I'd land on that issue myself. I think I'd say back then when men's and women's roles were more traditional, I hope I wouldn't get on a lifeboat. But today, am I letting OF girl get on that lifeboat before me so she can make more spicy content? Absolutely not. Man, maybe I am watching too much of the whatever podcast. But you get my point. We live in a world where men and women are equal and gender roles are fluid and malleable. So I can respect the perspective of wanting to maintain chivalry and dying on the boat, and I can also respect the opinion of, if men and women are to be treated equal, why would we just have just the men die by virtue of their gender? Why can't everybody just die? If it was the modern era and I was going down the chivalry path, I'd die anyway, because I'd be questioning, do trans women get to go ahead of me on the lifeboat? The boat would be filling up with water and I'd have one phone playing ContraPoints and the other phone playing Matt Walsh's What is a Woman, trying to make up my mind. But you know, that's the real test about how serious someone is about their gender identity. It would be interesting to see how many trans men are ripping off their pants, changing into a dress, and quickly dry shaving in a Titanic bathroom to see if they can get a spot on a lifeboat. Question, would it be more cowardly for me to just charge my way onto a female and child lifeboat, throwing kids to the side, throwing them overboard if I had to? Or would it be more cowardly to quickly change my gender and just scream, I'm a trans woman, get out of my way? Your thoughts in the comments below, please. But even those jokes kind of have a point. Gender nowadays has been so deconstructed, both in terms of roles and ontology, that I just don't think I'd die on behalf of my gender in current year. Brian also highlights the differences in cultures and social orders back then compared to today, right after he describes what he'd be doing as he's sailing away in a lifeboat.
Yeah. Oh, I would sit there like
He just sits there like,
I would be double finger like, oh, but to be fair, this is like a totally different like social order back then, where there were more traditional expectations. Like now, if I'm sitting across, like, but the girl sitting across from me on the lifeboat judging me, she's a porn actress, and she's like, you're not upholding your traditional male standards. I'm like,
well, neither.
You're literally a dude, I don't care.
That's kind of what I said. If we live in a society that doesn't have those social roles anymore, would the social role of men being more expendable be the only role that holds over? That feels awfully convenient to my fairer sexed compatriots. But to steelman feminists, I think there's a lot of feminists that would say no, men and women shouldn't be treated differently in a lifeboat situation. They should both be treated equally. So to those feminists, fair enough. You and Brian agree on something. There you go.
He doesn't answer the questions. He just pivots, and when he can't respond, he goes, weren't you saying something, to like a panelist to try and completely change the subject.
First of all, there's like 200 people on this fucking panel, okay? It's not just you and Brian debating, and you guys had a long conversation about the Titanic, about war, about taking bullets, about a lot of things. I think Brian was engaging with you. His opinion seemed pretty sensible to me, and I think it can be summarized thusly. In a different time, perhaps men's duties included self-sacrifice, and women also had a lot of onerous duties. We've reduced those duties on both sides, but there are still some relics, one being potentially male disposability. And if we're intent on reducing and not gendering those duties, why would we keep the duty of self-sacrifice only to men? That seems unfair. Is that not a fair position? If you had more pushback, you should have said that during the podcast. Instead, you wait until Brian's not in the room and you go home, and then you make this brave video talking about how you dismantled him. That seems serpentine to me. Then we get to Warren complaining about Brian's views on war.
Can there be a necessary war? So I tried to point that out with a specific example with World War II.
Well, you know, it's interesting. I mean, maybe I'm being a bit pedantic here. I think the United States involvement in World War II is a bit overstated. Like Russia would have wiped the floor with Germany. But
one day there will be more conflict. So what do we do when conflict does arrive is the question. So when does sacrifice become valid?
Gee, I don't know, Warren. It's not like you were literally there in the room with Brian when he answered your question. This just has to be disingenuous because the clips you took, Warren, were from like directly before his answer and also after his answer, which means you just cut out his answer. So I don't know why you'd say what you just said if you were being good faith here.
There's probably definitely been historical wars, probably like smaller scale conflicts where it was just like there's a belligerent, an aggressor who's like, we're going to conquer your land. And then like the people, the soldiers in the defensive position there, I think there's like good argument to be made that these men should step up for the defense of their land. And by extension, like historically, there were a lot of like war crimes committed towards women, like essay, rape, and for example, so like probably a cohort of men in these societies don't want to see their women either their wives or just their country women, I guess, getting raped, and then they just want to. And then if they do lose the war, the men are going to get killed anyway. So it's like that's kind of compelling. But like, would I want to like? If it was the late 1960s, early 1970s, would I want to get shipped off to Vietnam? No. Like, yeah.
So there you go. Brian doesn't just waffle about war, refusing to answer the question. His point is that a lot of wars are wars he doesn't think people need to get involved in, and that we often glamorize war, which you show in your next clip.
Yeah, war is bad. Yeah, I don't think it's a debate about was Vietnam a valid war or an examination of any past wars.
I don't disagree with you.
And now I'm in.
What's your point, though?
My point is that we perhaps romanticize the glory of war, and I do think there's plenty of men who are brave and they go out guns blazing, and that's badass. But I think like probably the majority of men who die in war, it's like cold and alone in some trench in a foreign territory or whatever it is.
I agree.
And it's not glamorous and there's no glory, and or they're not even, they're literally just smoking a cigarette, they're eating their ration, and like a shell just implodes their face and they're dead instantly, and there's not even a thought process of like glory or anything. Like their sacrifice to the country, that should be respected. But in that moment, on the individual level, I don't know. I don't see it.
I think you're right. Yeah, if a bomb lands on your head, you're not going to think about much.
You're right. It's not fair.
I don't see a problem with what Brian is saying here. Going to war for most people is probably a last resort. Brian already said there are wars that are justified, and on a basis of men's biologies, they're going to be the ones in front line fighting. Notice though that this is different from the Titanic example, which War and you don't seem to differentiate. In a Titanic example, the duty to self-sacrifice isn't linked to biology, it's instead linked to culture, a culture that arguably doesn't exist anymore. Compare that to war, where the realities of physical strength differences between genders is still very much a thing. They're just different examples. I obviously can't speak for Brian, but realistically, I think he'd be fine with a situation where every able-bodied person can be conscripted if it's an existential war on like US soil, and he'd probably want women to be in like support roles and men to be in active combat roles. We see that work well in places like Israel, where both women and men have mandatory military service, and there's no reason we couldn't do the same thing in America if we wanted to. But then we get this clip from War, and followed by a clip of him apparently destroying Brian.
Because in the moment, it really felt like we were getting somewhere. Then I play the footage back. I'm like, I don't know what's happening here.
Oh my God, people think I'm a pussy because I survived? Fuck them.
I think it's deeper than that. I don't think we can really understand the human soul in this way, really. It eats away at us, and maybe it's because I believe in a higher power. I think that evil is not a social construct. It exists, and it can creep in.
Wait, you think it would
good
be
intentions, and often we can logic our way into bad decisions. Because it's when illogical behavior saves you, is what is intriguing, and that's where spirituality for me lies. It's the only explanation. So we were talking about with Brigadier Nicholson, but Churchill saying, no, we're going to fight to the last man, only when the last one's choking their own blood, which is not logical. Everyone around them is saying, do the logical move. They're making your argument. What's the point of going down fighting when we can appease with Hitler, surrender, and live? And he said, it's better to die defending the temples of your ancestors. That will allow your forebears to rise again one day.
First of all, was that really a mic drop moment to end the clip on? As Brian was about to say, Warren, do you think it's actually evil for men to not self-sacrifice? If so, that's the exact type of male disposability that Brian is talking about. But when he pushed you on that part, you kind of backpedaled a bit at least. But I guess for this to be such a mic drop moment, it must have just left Brian speechless. Oh, wait.
He said, it's better to die defending the temples of your ancestors. That will allow your forebears to rise again one day.
But I think the calculus here is a little bit different, because if we're looking, if I take somebody else's seat in the life preserver on the Titanic, only one other, like it's one life to one life. Whereas like I don't know if it's a totally fair comparison or equivocal to say, okay, well, if we sacrifice 10,000 soldiers to save hundreds of thousands of soldiers, that's something commonly done in warfare, where it's like, well, okay.
It wouldn't be one life though, because it's all the men don't do it unless you're the only one. And that's what makes you lose your legacy.
Wait, all the men
The men voluntarily stay back, except the one who doesn't, and that's why all the women sit there and stare at him. And
Well,
it destroys.
I mean, I'm
his
very
soul.
much okay with women giving me oh my God, you're...
Oh, okay, so Brian gave a completely coherent answer to you that you didn't include and showed how you grandstanding about Churchill and talking about Hitler appeasement does not map on in any way to the example about the Titanic, which is what you guys were talking about when you started going off about this. And you even seem to realize this because you pivot to, well, women would look at you disapprovingly, which leads to this exchange.
What if your kids were on shore, and they would know? That would be enough for me. And if that would be enough for you, then it shows you the magnitude of that decision about this is something deeper. Even if you don't have kids.
Oh yeah, I mean, I would be prepared though to say, and if my position isn't clear, even if I had nobody in my life, I would still take that option.
You'd be more likely if you had no one in your life. That's my point.
To what? To
If you did have kids, and
Yeah.
they were and you would come home to them, and they
Yeah.
would know, and that would be your legacy. It would go down, let's just metaphorically, let's just for the thought experiment,
Sure.
it would go down into history, and then you'd be in this movie in 2012 or whatever, and they're depicting you on screen, and that's how you're going to be remembered. You're saying it doesn't matter to you, and I can understand that. That's a logical argument. Why would you're dead? Who cares?
Oh, okay. Wait, so you're saying like, but when I'm still
I
alive,
would care is what I'm saying. And in that
Oh,
moment,
just to
that
be-
would make me take a different course of action.
what? So just to be clear, like when I say I don't like, it could very well be the case, like being labeled a coward, that would bring some degree of shame. It's not that I'm saying that there wouldn't potentially be guilt or shame, but I think my desire to say I have a family, right? My desire to survive for the benefit of my family, and then also I'm not going to virtue signal the benefit of myself and self-preservation. I am willing, in terms of the calculus of, the comparison of all factors, the totality of all the circumstances, survive, but have shame. I would rather survive and have shame than die and go out doing the honorable thing, if that makes sense.
No, I get your
And-
position. We're kind of repeating it now.
Yeah. And even I would also frame it to my kids, there could be social pressure impacting my kids, whoa, your dad wasn't willing to die. I'd be like, you might think that, but also I'm still here now, and your guys' life would be way more fucked up if I still wasn't alive. So to me, it's to the benefit of the family, to the benefit of myself. And that supersedes the external social pressure, social shame, social guilt. And yeah. And I reject the disposability of males. So it's just, I think it's a pretty coherent worldview.
I agree with you. Males should not be disposable.
But I mean, within your worldview, aren't they?
I think this is a very easy issue to see both sides on. I can see your side, Warren, that you think the right thing to do is to sacrifice yourself and use the example of how your kids will see you. But I think Brian's point is equally fair. Personally, if my parents were on a boat today and I found out my dad didn't give up his seat for a woman and that's the reason he was alive, I'd be happy he had made that decision. Now, yeah, I can also see it as heroic if he self-sacrificed, but ultimately I care about my father more than I care about a random stranger. And how much more true would this be in the case of little kids who are now missing their father? But again, both of these perspectives are totally fine to hold. And if I can see both of these perspectives, I'm sure you can too, Warren. So I'd really like to know why you felt the need to make this video. For me watching this podcast episode, it seems you guys had a civil discussion and then you decide to go and snake him by presenting it as if you're expected to berate women, you cut out relevant context, and then you act like Brian's perspective is just absurd. I just don't see why someone talking so much about honor for so long during the podcast would do something so dishonorable as soon as they get back, but maybe I'm the crazy one. Then when Brian posts a comment clarifying why he thinks your video is disingenuous, you delete his comment off your YouTube video. Wild behavior, Warren. But this is what I think you do. You're so headstrong in your own videos, but then you completely backpedal on everything when you're actually faced in a one-on-one in-person debate. I saw this when you made a video on Destiny full of piss and vinegar, and then when you actually talk to him on a video call, you spend an hour backpedaling on everything you had just said in the video. And even Destiny's audience noticed this. These are the top comments on his video with you. Warren did not have the same energy in his convo as he did in his videos. I now understand why the totality of Warren's content is him monologuing a script. People like Warren Smith truly annoy me because he'll have all this super concrete in terms of tone view on someone like Destiny and then goes ultra soft when Destiny's in front of him. And look, I get being civil. I think it's good to be civil, and this is how we can actually make ground in a conversation. But then going back home after being civil in real time to a person and then snaking that person is just cowardice at that point. But if you watched Warren's video, if you're a fan of his, if you watched the original podcast, let me know what you think in the comments. Am I wrong? Did Warren actually dismantle Brian? Is Brian in the wrong? Tell me. And as usual, shout out to our channel members. Thank you for supporting the channel, and you too can become a channel member for only $1.99. And of course, again, do not forget to like and subscribe.
We have one member missing.